Agenda item number 47 is a presentation of preliminary financial results and closeout for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021.
Thank you. Over to the manager for perhaps a few opening comments on the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. As I mentioned last month, we're coming to you today with proposed allocations and a summary of our financial results. Those allocations include proposals for the balances we have in closeout, fund balance from the end of fiscal 21, and also proposed allocations for the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And also be talking about some proposals about compensation, which I had broached that subject last month when we were talking about retention issues with police and some of our emergency public health workers. So I'm going to turn it over to Richard Stevenson to walk us through the closeout presentation. And then I think there'll be time for questions there. And then we'll move on to the rescue plan where Richard and Emily and I will walk you through some of those details. So over to Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. So as the manager said, I'll summarize the year-end results and highlight the manager's recommendation and the significant portion of fund balance carryover which is restricted or already determined based on policies or prior board action. This agenda item is the manager's presentation of the closeout recommendations. The county board won't take action on these recommendations until the November meeting next month. So one back. There you go. Thank you. So last month, we came before you and highlighted the early FY 2023 forecast and noted that as we are preparing for FY 23, bridge funding or the use of one-time dollars may be required to get us to the other side of the economic slowdown impacting Arlington's budget. The manager's recommendations this month sets aside a significant portion of the discretionary funding as unallocated at this time, so as to incorporate the funding as part of the FY 2023 budget process, which we'll be working through over the next 6 months. So in total, as we close out FY 2021, we have about $20.5 million available for discretionary use, down slightly from the prior year, which was a little over $22 million. The manager is recommending that this funding be split into 2 areas, as you can see on the pie chart there on the right. And as we will talk about more later, in a later item, as the manager already mentioned, pay is a significant concern. And the manager is recommending that from closeout, we allocate $1.8 million for a 1% pay increase beginning in January 2022. As you recall, the FY22 budget only included a 1% increase to employees, significantly lower than in prior years and much lower than our regional comparators this fiscal year. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, the balance of the available funding is being recommended to remain unallocated for future budget discussions. So in summary, overall, the county ended the fiscal year within budget, which probably this time next year or last year we were worried about as we came to last September, or a year ago September, and described the revisions that we were making on the revenue front. But in total, we ended the year with $305 million in fund balance, of which, though, 93% of this is restricted funding, or restricted in use in some way or another. And I'll talk about that in a couple slides. As I mentioned, the $20.5 million, or 2.2%, is available for allocation for discretionary uses. Tax revenue is right at budget, but non-tax revenue, including fees, fines, and charges for services, were under budgeted amounts, as we saw significant drop-offs of fee-based revenue impacted by the pandemic slowdown and shutdown. On the expense side, some examples of areas where we had savings included savings in healthcare expenses and personnel savings due to hiring freezes and difficulty in hiring to fill vacancies. So at year end, after carrying over unspent grants and other restricted funding, there was about $40 million not spent by operating departments. And this is a larger amount than is typical. But that comes for a variety of reasons. For example, the Department of Parks and Recreation had significant expenditure savings, almost just over $9 million due to their reduced facility operations and reduced program offerings. However, they also received $7.2 million less in revenue. So the expenditure savings were offset by the loss of revenue. And this occurred in several other departments like DHS, CPHD, and the fire department. In FY 2021, we received reimbursement revenue from FEMA and CARES, with over $15 million in CARES funding supporting payroll costs in FY 2021 for staff diverted from their regular duties to assist with COVID-19 responses, as well as for regular public health salaries for staff supporting the pandemic response efforts. Additionally, the county spent more than $7 million in local funds on pandemic response efforts in areas like testing operations, contact tracing, rental assistance, and food insecurity. So as I just noted, the tax revenue was right at budget. Real estate tax revenue came in about 2% higher than budget. However, we had shortfalls in some of our other large tax sources, those being sales tax was down almost 10% from budget, meals tax was down just over 27%, and transient occupancy, or the hotel taxes as we talk about them, was down 71% from budget. All information and numbers that we've been sharing with you and the community over the last year as we've been monitoring the revenue side and expenditure side of the equation through the fiscal year. Offsetting the shortfalls, fortunately, we had business professional occupational license come in surprisingly strong with revenues of almost $13 million above budget, holding steady with the pre-pandemic levels. And we had lowered the BPOL budget at the beginning of FY 2021, just as the pandemic was starting to take hold, not knowing what impact, not really realizing that impact that the pandemic would have on BPOL. For non-tax revenue, as we've talked about, a number of non-tax revenues were underperforming through the pandemic. And as you can see at the bottom of the slide, they included interest income, transit revenue, parking meter revenue, and various fines and ticket revenue. So I know the print's a little small on here, but I wanted to lay out all the pieces for the allocation of fund balance. So fund balance totals just over $305 million. As I mentioned, 93% of which is restricted or already allocated per board policy or prior board action. Our reserves, that's the general fund operating reserve, and the stabilization reserve totals $95.5 million. Based on the principles of revenue sharing, unspent school expenditure savings, and taxes above budget are shared. And so schools will carry over $62.1 million for schools. The Affordable Housing Investment Fund will carrying over $91.7 million. However, $20 million of this, as you'll recall, are the monies from Amazon that we received in the spring. There's about $6 million in restricted funding that it includes seized assets, grants, and other restricted transit revenue. And the board took action in a number of areas when we adopted the FY22 budget, when we came before you and recognized that we would have some funding from the fiscal year left over, and they were applied in a variety of ways. Here listed, some examples listed on the screen here. As you probably know, the closeout board report is about 40 pages with a lot more detail than I'm going into right now. And then finally, at the bottom of that slide is the discretionary funding that I talked about up front, with the manager recommending that a portion of it, a small portion of it, go to a pay, and then the rest remaining unallocated for future deliberations. And they can go to a variety of things that may be priorities of the board and community, and we've just listed a couple things here for illustrative purposes. So, next steps. The financial information presented here will not be finalized until the end of October, with our Management and Finance Accounting Department working with our county's external auditors Any changes in the final numbers will be included in the report next month to you, and the county's annual financial report will be available at the end of November. And you can see here a couple of the things that are coming up over the next couple months. And then on the next slide is a graph that we've shown often about the timeline for the entire budget process, and we are in the front end on the left. I will highlight now, and Emily will mention later, we're soliciting feedback on these and other budget recommendations online, and links can be found on the county's website and will be included in any press release that goes out. And so with that, I will conclude my presentation of the FY 2021 closeout. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. It's a lot of material here. This is the first of two steps on closeout, with the next step coming at the November meetings. So we'll have robust discussion for the coming month on this. Colleagues may have questions, of course, on this. At this point, we also have, this item is closeout. The next item is American Rescue Plan discussion. But I'm happy to see if there are questions, and I don't know that we'll have too many questions. We may, Ms. Crystal, and we certainly can also move to a motion after a first round of questions, if that works.
Thank you. Just a somewhat technical question followed by maybe a more substantive one for beginning with Mr. Stevenson. On slide 6 about the allocations of fund balances, carryover of existing reserves and AHIF in that category of restricted fund balances, that is the entirety of the balance of those two funds, respectively, right? That's not proposed additions to those.
It's balances remaining, as in with AHIF, some additional funding that the board put in at the adoption of the 22 budget. So it's everything planned to unspent or new monies carried over for.
I think sometimes that can be confusing in the actions that we take, right? It looks like we're adding that more, or I think maybe folks think, oh, this is money that the county should have spent down in the fiscal year. But in fact, I imagine it's because the rating agencies and markets evaluate our books that way, and so we present them that way. The only thing that I just wanted to remark upon was that I was surprised. I could be wrong, but I think that the AF balance seems unusually high for this time of year. I think you mentioned that was because of the Amazon contribution, which was
$20 million.
$20 million, okay. And so this may just be a request for a manager at the time of adoption of carryover. But if we could get maybe a little more detail from our housing staff about some of the pipeline items for that. That's a pretty sizable AHIF, obviously, that the $20 million plussing that up, but that's something we often pay attention to this time of year, and so I appreciate a little more opportunity on it.
We'd be happy to do that, and as a reminder, the board has made some preliminary allocations out of that for Park Arlington, which I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's close to $30 million. And there are several other projects, but there are pieces of that remain unallocated pending some other projects. And we also have a NOFA process underway.
Indeed. Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful. Obviously, the conversation about how much to allocate to AHIF is one that spans the entirety of the budget conversation, and having a good sense of what's on the books in the balances and what's truly available in the balances at this point would be helpful to me. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. The 50 is a start, but of 91 or 90, it'll be great to get that sense. Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you. Was always good to check on the balance and how much of that balance is already committed. So another technical question. So the county manager proposes $18.5 million to remain unallocated from the closeout funding. So in November, what we are inviting public testimony for is to agree or disagree with, the open allocation, right?
Sure. So the question was for Mr. Stevenson? Yeah.
Okay.
So what action you'll take in November related to the $18.5 million?
Yes.
That is up to the board. Over the last couple years, the board at the closeout adoption has kept a significant portion of the discretionary fundings unallocated, so it could be involved in the public process that we will go through for the proposed budget the spring and ultimately for budget adoption in the spring. So the board, that's your purview for whether you want to change that allocation at all in November or leave it undesignated as a part of the budget process coming up in the next 6 months.
Fine, that's helpful for me. And the second question is on the sales tax and the transit occupancy tax, et cetera. They are, you know, these have, I mean, the income from them, the revenue from them has, you know, declined significantly. So do you feel that there are any prospects to recover a little bit? Do we have any reason to believe that they will recover, or will they continue weak?
We are seeing recovery of all our local taxes as we go through this fiscal year. And as we talked a little bit about in September, we've built in some growth assumptions for FY23 for transient occupancy tax, sales tax, and meals tax. Sales and meals in our 23 forecast are getting back to historical norms, not quite there yet. TOT is lagging, hotel tax is lagging. I think the forecast includes still being about 50% of pre-pandemic levels, but we're hopeful, and we'll come back to you over the next couple months with updates on that, and that will specifically be included in the manager's proposed budget. We'll have several more months of these monthly taxes to get a better sense of how they're recovering. But we have already assumed recovery of those taxes.
Fair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carantonis. And your question, totally reasonable, and I got to take some responsibility for haven't had a chance yet to loop with you on some of this, and this year has been so different than others. So we will have additional discussion over the coming month. I also realize I didn't see earlier, Ms. Jacobs, just trying to make sure, do we have public speakers on this item or no?
We do not.
Okay. I thought we didn't, but I would rather check. So I guess we'd turn now on this item, item 47, to Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, I'd be pleased to make a motion if that's all right, and I'll ask the clerk to put it up on the screen just because I think it'll be a little more helpful. And you know, we're going to be having the public hearing on November 13th, so we'll be hearing from people then. And so what I'm moving is that we direct staff to go ahead and present these recommendations to consider for our adoption after that public hearing is made. So we may make some changes after that, depending on what we hear from folks. And I don't think I'll read through the whole thing. It's basically the manager's recommendation, and it's for the public hearing we'll be having November 13, and then we'll be adopting it after that.
Thank you.
Some changes.
Okay, so we see it up on the screen, and did you want to?
We did, and I'm sort of speaking to it. I mean, I think this is fine to work for it. I'm pleased with just being reminded by Mr. Stevens that we often don't allocate a lot of it, given the uncertainties of the year. You know, when we get to November, I mean, we'll see, but I'm going to probably be pretty comfortable not allocating very much of it until we get further into the budget season and have a better sense of what we're doing. So I'm very pleased to have us go ahead and move forward with this suggestion, and I'm really pleased that we're going to be able to sort of signal and go ahead and give a pay increase to our employees who've not had a pay increase for quite some time, and it's been a rough number of years. And they, of course, are the ones who make this county go. So I'm pleased to have that in here as well.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. I was just trying to multitask for a second. Did we get a second on that motion?
No.
So before we do, point of order, if you can help me, I'm
Sure.
a little lost with what we're actually
Yes.
doing right now.
Yeah. So it's my understanding, and our acting attorney can help us. The staff's going to go ahead and present this to our public for their comment after our meeting, and I believe what we're doing here is he's presenting it, we're voting on going ahead and having him present that to the public. Now, we're not voting on adopting it, we're
blessing this is the
presenting it.
package
We're
that he
blessing
presents to
it,
the
yes,
public.
as a package that's going to get presented. That's my understanding. Is that, I see head nods, yes. I know it's not the clearest language, which was part of the reason I wanted to put it up on the screen, but that's my understanding. They need to be, we're okay with it that they're presenting it, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey, and I'm glad
I have a second.
I'll second it. So thank you, Ms. Garvey. for putting it up on the screen, and Mr. Dorsey for clarifying our steps there. So there's a fair bit of detail that's in the board report, but this is essentially a presentation approving the manager's presentation that would, and we will then move to a November 13th county board meeting, hearing and discussion and then action on closeouts. So that's this first step. You spoke to your motion. Are there comments on this motion? Mr. Carantonis?
Oh, no, I have.
Got it. So there will be, item 48 includes additional pieces. You mentioned the staff salary increases. That will be also addressed in part of item 48. But for now, the question is on approving this presentation and Ms. Garvey's motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Now we will go on to item 48, and I believe another of our DMF team who is here ready to present, and I know, just take this chance to thank you for all the work that each of the four and many others are doing, because all the work you're doing is not always noticed and in the public eye, but we are very, very grateful for it. So I believe it's to Ms. Hughes for a presentation. Is that right, Mr. Schwartz?
I'm going to start off.
Okay.
And I'll take us through the first couple slides, and then I'll hand it off to Ms. Hughes to go through some of the new recommendations that the manager has on the American Rescue Plan Act. So we reviewed the next few slides with you and the public in September, but we wanted to include it as a part of this whole this whole presentation. So just again, reminding everyone that of what we're talking about, that the president last spring signed a $1.9 trillion Arpa legislation to give funding to states and localities, and Arlington was allocated $46 million from that. We also received some additional monies, as you can see here, for rental assistance and transit relief. It's coming to us in two allotments. We've received the first tranche last May of $23 million, and we'll receive the next tranche this spring. We need to obligate the monies by the end of calendar year 24, and they need to be fully spent by 2026. So as you'll see in a couple slides, some of the recommendations span more than just 1 year for some investments in our community. And then the Arlington Public Schools separately received almost $19 million through the ARPA legislation. Just reminding everybody on the permitted uses, the legislation was adopted to support COVID response efforts, to support immediate economic stabilizations for both businesses and households, to address systemic challenges that led to the unequal impact of the pandemic, and to allowed for the replacement of some lost revenue the governments may have had, but there are certain restrictions about how we can spend those monies. In September, we also mentioned all three of these items together: closeout of the fiscal year and the monies potentially available then, budget planning and the forecast that we gave that the manager talked through, that there will still be some challenges in developing the 23 budget, and ARPA, closeout and ARPA being one-time monies, and then working through the process of bridging to this post-pandemic life and economic environment that we hope is right around the corner. So let's summarize the federal ARPA allocations to Arlington. The board has already taken action with some of the monies, and that upper here, it almost to me looks greenish, or I don't know what color that is. I'm going to call it yellow. Box in the upper left represents sort of decisions that the board has already taken to date. The board approved funding for the pandemic response. The board used some of the funds to restore cuts that the manager had proposed when we were developing the 22 budget. And last month, the board approved a Grants 2.0 program to help small business. The columns to the right of the shading illustrate the allocations of the first two items over the next 2 years for which we can use ARPA grant funding. Below that is the projected fiscal impact of the new manager recommendations that Ms. Hughes will walk us through. Some of these proposals are one-time or short-term in nature. That's the first line. And then some recommendations which may be considered longer-term based on future board decisions, and we'll talk through what those projects might be in a minute. And then the totals are on the bottom. You can see the allocations by years of the ARPA funding and the percent spend down of those monies over the 3 fiscal years here on this slide. Okay, so last month the manager proposed a number of ARPA goals and guiding principles as we were internally working through recommendations to the board and community. And we had put some examples on the slide in September, which are what you see here. And so they include COVID response was the guiding principle, workforce sustainability, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next item, equity and disadvantaged neighborhoods, housing assistance, community recovery, transit, and fiscal resilience. Some of the proposals that we're making cut across or could be put in a couple of these buckets, but working through with internally and starting to get that preliminary feedback externally, these were the areas that we were focusing the ARPA recommendations to you this month. And so, as I mentioned, this is just an illustration of some of the actions the board have already taken on the ARPA funding. And as you can see, the grants 2.0, the different elements of the pandemic response in the community, anyway, it's just this just illustrates where we've already made decisions on. So now I'll turn it over to Ms. Hughes, and she'll walk through the next 2 slides that has the new specific proposals that the manager is making to you all.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Ms. Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this first slide goes through those ARPA proposals that are one-time or short-term that Mr. Stevenson had mentioned. So that means that these projects need funding for 1 or 2 years to be completed. They're organized by the guiding principle, the primary guiding principle for each proposal. Many of them would fit into different categories, but this was kind of the primary idea. Within the community recovery area, the first proposed use of funding is for the relaunch program that AED has been working on. Arlington Economic Development launched this program earlier this year, and the proposal is to provide $500,000 in funding each in FY22 and FY23. The relaunch program is an innovative small business program that is designed to support diverse legacy-owned micro-enterprises as they recover from the effects of COVID-19. It focuses on that personalized business services and technology tools that allow those micro-entrepreneurs to discover new customers and launch or expand their online sales. The second project under this category is a back-to-work program that would be launched with DHS and AED cooperatively. Over a 2-year period, this back-to-work program would support low-income, low-skilled, and long-term unemployed residents, including underserved populations and undocumented workers who were laid off from the region's retail, hospitality, administrative, and other industries negatively impacted by COVID-19. The initiative would provide a variety of accessible employment and training services to maximize the residents' ability to re-enter the local labor market. That would include training scholarship funds and supportive services funds that would provide work experience incentives. This program would cost $310,000 in FY22 and $255,000 in FY23. It would be complementary to trainings provided at the Arlington Employment Center already. The next program area is a business outreach, as part of the business outreach initiative that the police department does. This would provide additional resources to the business resources section in the outreach unit to support its funding for operating supplies, equipment, and training expenses, training for officers in the Arlington Restaurant Initiative and the Business Safety Initiative. This is proposed for $40,000 in each FY22 and FY23. The last program under this category of community recovery is a guaranteed income pilot with $500,000 provided both in FY22 and in FY23. In partnership with the nonprofit Arlington Community Foundation and the Department of Human Services, the Arlington's Guarantee is a program that would give $500 per month for 18 months to 200 low-income Arlington households with children. The cash is guaranteed income, meaning that it would be consistently delivered every month and there are no conditions on how the money could be used. Recipients would be randomly selected from a pool of Arlington residents participating in the county's housing grants program or other community programs. And DHS has worked with the Virginia Department of Social Services to make sure that this additional cash would not impact state and federal benefits that these participating households are already receiving. A comprehensive study of the pilot's already been developed, including a comparison group of 100 housing grant households who would not be in the program. The next category of programs is equity and disadvantaged neighborhoods. The first proposal is for equity engagement funding, one-time funding of $50,000 in FY22. Recent dialogues on race and equity surfaced community perspectives that Arlington's structures for decisions and public input are narrow and advantage dominant perspectives and do not offer access or representation for communities of color to county government leadership. An emerging best practice in the field of equitable engagement is to ensure lived experience and community expertise are fairly compensated and publicly recognized. To that end, $50,000 in Arpa funding would be used as a pilot and collect data on practices to compensate and/or provide material supports for those who are participating in ad hoc engagement opportunities and ongoing advisory capacities. The second program under this equity and disadvantaged neighborhoods category is the broadband study, providing $150,000 in FY23. The broadband study presents an opportunity for Arlington to lay the groundwork for broadband investments and develop a broader framework in setting long-term policy goals. Arlington plans to engage a third-party consultant to conduct a thorough needs assessment that evaluates the county's available broadband resources and their ability to meet existing and future resident and business needs. The next item is a disparity study at $500,000 in FY 2023. A disparity study is the comparison between the participation of small, minority, and women-owned businesses in an organization's contracting and the availability of those businesses to perform that work. In order to allow for set-asides or additional points for SWAM vendors, the county is legally required to first perform this type of study to determine if such steps are necessary. The last program in this category is Trek Mobile. This is a Department of Parks and Recreation program for therapeutic recreation, education, and knowledge that would cost $11,000 each in FY22 and FY23. The goal of the program is to bring programming to adult individuals with developmental disabilities during daytime hours at their residences. Activities could include, but not limited to, art, games, sports, leisure education, and social opportunities. The park's therapeutic recreation staff would visit group homes or a local park near a group home on a scheduled basis to provide these services. The next guiding principle for this ARPA funding is housing assistance. And the first item is a mediation and alternative dispute resolution for CAF property oversight and tenant support. This is $30,000 in FY22 and $30,000 in FY23. The mediation and alternative dispute resolution program would offer alternatives for resolving tenant-landlord dispute through mediation. The mediation would be done by county staff or an outside vendor. The next program is the Affordable Housing Property Assessment. This is one-time funding of $300,000 in FY22. And the goal of this project is to proactively assess building conditions and tenant needs in buildings with committed affordable units, specifically in properties that have not had substantial renovations within the last 5 years. The 12-month project would provide immediate funding to a contracted external partner to increase its capacity to provide housing quality standard inspections to CAF units. Additionally, funds would be provided to several nonprofits that would provide tenant outreach and education, listening sessions, and housing legal representation. The last program in the housing assistance area is Eviction Prevention. This is providing $60,000 in FY22 and $1.4 million in FY23. Since the onset of the pandemic, the need for eviction prevention assistance to pay rent, mortgages, arrears, security deposits, and utilities has been paramount. Prior to the pandemic, Arlington was providing roughly $900,000 on eviction prevention assistance. In FY21, over $6 million was spent on eviction prevention assistance by Arlington and Arlington Thrive, serving 1,735 unduplicated households. In addition, over $15 million has been spent by the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development on Arlington residents. Currently, the county and Arlington Thrive are spending $150,000 a month on eviction prevention assistance. For FY22, some of our federal money, CDBG and CSBG funding of $600,000 would provide this need. But because the funding cannot be used on indirect costs, ARPA funding would be used for administrative costs in this fiscal year. Funding identified for FY23 would be for direct eviction prevention as well. In the last category shown on this slide, workforce sustainability, there's two different categories of retention bonuses. The first is a match for bonuses for the sheriff's office. We're getting some funding from the Commonwealth to provide uniform sheriff's deputies with bonuses of $3,000, but those are only provided to those that receive comp board funding. So this $174,000 would provide those bonuses also to our uniform staff that are not funded by the comp board. So it's essentially a match for that bonus. The other retention bonus listed here is $1.93 million in FY22 for police and emergency service health employees. These staff are leaving the county workforce at a record rate, and these frontline employees work in various essential roles, including mandated service areas, in addition to performing high-risk response duties. While the initial recommendation in the board report is to fund these and the sheriff bonuses from ARPA, closeout or any other source of funding, such as current balances, would work for the authorization of these payments. Finally, while none of the projects here are listed as being in our fiscal resilience category, it permeates a number of the different proposals in both this slide and the next one. Examples include relaunch, back to work, and the broadband study, all of which support the fiscal resilience of our county. On this next slide, it summarizes proposals for the use of ARPA funding that would have an ongoing fiscal impact. These projects fall within two categories of the guiding principles: transit and transportation, and equity in disadvantaged neighborhoods. Within the transit and transportation area, there are two proposals related to Arlington Transit. The first is an APS student fareless initiative. The funding is for a Phase 1 pilot that would continue and expand a 2019 APS pilot that was suspended due to the pandemic. The pilot provides free rides to and from school for targeted students by subsidizing the currently discounted $1 student iRide card, and is planned to begin in the first quarter of calendar year 2022. The pilot targets locations where art can provide the biggest impact to APS, and will include high school and middle school students whose school bus transportation involves consolidated or hub stops, travel to schools outside of their home school zones, and or within a 1.5-mile walk zone. The second proposed art program is for low-income fare assistance for $1.2 million in FY22 and $250,000 in FY23. The short-term low-income bus fare assistance promotion would provide preloaded Smart Trip cards to Arlington residents that meet the income criteria for the receipt of more affordable transportation. The Department of Environmental Services and Department of Human Services would target recipients of supplemental nutrition assistance and temporary assistance for needy family programs. Approximately 7,200 Arlington residents receive services from the two programs are already identified, which help ease the administration of these low fare assistance programs. Transit staff is also pursuing a technical assistance grant from the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation to support the development and execution of a new art fair program. The grant, if approved, will support consultants working with staff in the design of a reduced and/or zero fare program. The scope would also include the development of an expanded student fare program. The aim is to complete a fare study and program design by the fall of 2022. Our second category for ongoing programs is equity in disadvantaged neighborhoods. The first item here is for child care investments. The cost of this is $100,000 in FY 2022 and another $100,000 in FY 2023. And this proposal is to expand one of the Department of Parks and Recreation's preschool programs. It would expand the program to be from 3 to 10 hours a day, so part-time preschool to be a full-time preschool, and also transition it from being a school year program to a full calendar year program, essentially becoming more like a daycare with the preschool within it. Doing so would bring greater equity for full-day childcare to members of the community and one of our most highest socially vulnerable zip codes within Arlington. Fee reductions would assist in making the program affordable for all families. So the timing of this program is that it would begin next fall. The funding in FY 22 would be to hire the staff and have the program design become finalized before the opening next fall. The next item under Equity and Disadvantaged Neighborhoods is an expansion of the Crisis Intervention Center, which was discussed some at last month's September meeting. The estimated need here is for a little over $700,000 in FY 2022 and $1.7 million in FY 2023. This additional support is needed for increased operating funds and staffing to expand the Crisis Intervention Center to a level necessary to address the current crisis. Once fully operational, the Arlington Crisis Center could serve up to 5 individuals in behavioral health crisis around the clock in a more therapeutic environment. Ultimately, the center would have the capacity to hold and transport clients under a temporary detention order, reducing the need for police officers to carry out those functions. The next item is emergency meal distribution for the DPR Social 60+ Cafe program participants. So this is the continuation of a program that Parks and Rec began during the pandemic, where they were providing flash frozen meals to seniors when they weren't able to get out. Parks and Rec has found that they want to make a few shifts in how this would be implemented. They think it would be better to provide shelf-stable meals to those participants because some seniors don't have access to refrigeration or to a way to heat up food. So this would be just a better way to meet that need. They're proposing this program be implemented each year from November to March to help distribute those meals to seniors who might not be able to get out during that time. The next program here listed is the ET3 program. You may remember that in the adopted FY 2022 budget, there was the adoption of the new EMS telehealth treatment in place and alternative transportation initiative by the fire department. This funding would allow the fire department to expand that program that they have already started to provide an SUV with all equipment needed for a treat-in-place healthcare provider, a new EMS staff vehicle that would facilitate advanced and basic life-saving training at each fire station, and a state-of-the-art training lab that would provide employees with scenario-based learning to ensure community members receive the best possible medical care. And it's expected that the expansion of this program would allow the fire department to improve penetration of medical care to underserved communities by giving patients options for care. It's also possible that the expansion of this program would result in more revenue for the program as well, as they were able to file for insurance or Medicaid reimbursement. But we just don't know the scale of that at this point. The next item under Equity and Disadvantaged Neighborhoods is Homeless Services Equity and Engagement. This is $70,000, a little over $70,000 in FY 22 and $197,000 in FY 23. In Arlington, we know that our homeless population is disproportionately Black and people of color. This project will work collaboratively across all the continuum of care providers to ensure that our services, practices, and governance are equity-centered and client-informed. This will include participation of clients via our nonprofit partners and evaluating ideas for appropriate compensation. The last item being proposed for the use of ARPA funding is a Marcus Alert Coordinator. This funding will provide the resources and staffing for the county's implementation of a new state law adopted in 2020 that is intended to dramatically improve mental health crisis response across the Commonwealth. The effort will require a whole government approach and also involve stakeholders and advocates across the county. The most notable requirement of the law is to implement a 988 line. It's analogous to a 911 that would address mental health crisis calls. This has to be implemented by July 1st of 2022. As Mr. Stevenson noted earlier, we have a couple ways that we're seeking community input and on these ideas being presented. One is an online tool that's going to be launched at probably, I think, tomorrow morning is the timeline, and be available through the beginning of November. The link will be in the press release and also on the website. We also always welcome emails to the DMF email box, which is dmf@arlingtonva.us. And I'm going to hand it back to the manager for a few additional comments on the proposals.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Richard. Wanted to end on a few points, focusing first off, just to summarize all the material we've been through. As we mentioned in closeout, we have left a significant amount unallocated as our proposal, and also for the American Rescue Plan. We spent a lot of time hearing from a lot of departments with ideas that I think match up with the spirit of the American Rescue Plan. For example, we really don't know what the future of transit is going to be in the United States. And making these kinds of investments that Emily just went through are incredibly important in making the investments and engagement that we need from our community and serving some of their most basic needs are incredibly important. In addition to that, we could go to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about compensation. And I know that this board has spent a lot of time talking to me and speaking to the workforce about the importance of the workforce. And it's been incredibly challenging for us here in the boardroom and also out in the streets where a lot of our staff are working to try to address that issue. I wanted to note that we're having some real challenges. I talked a lot about it last month about retention and recruitment and the limitations that we faced. And I wanted to give you an example. If we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more what's on this slide in a minute. But if you look, we don't get the opportunity to stand still all the time. If you look in fiscal 21, essentially, most of our sister jurisdictions did what we did, which is said, we're in a crisis, we have to take a pass. Fiscal 22, which is the budget year we're in, you can see some of our neighbors took different approaches. For example, Alexandria offered pay increases for their staff up to 5%. Also, Prince William and Loudoun were at 3%. And there have been a number of our sister jurisdictions that offered bonuses. What I wanted to do was read to you briefly from a note I sent to employees yesterday that summarized some of my sentiments, and look forward to hear what you feel about it, which is that, and I wanted to quote from it, "Several times over the past 2 years, I have lamented our financial situation didn't allow me to propose salary increases that I would have liked to compensate you for your work. We had the $900 bonus and 1% merit base raised anniversary. That was part of what the board adopted this past budget year. But the merit increases that we hope to see each year have proven financially difficult over the past 2 fiscal years. So therefore, what I'm asking the board to do today or tonight is to commit to the following compensation increases for the next year, effective July 1st of 2022. A merit-based increase, I think this is on the next slide too, if people want to, merit-based increase of 4.25% for general employees and a merit-based increase of 6.5% for our uniformed public safety staff. In my years with the county, we have never committed to compensation levels this early in the budget process. This commitment to employees would be included as part of my budget proposal in February and will be at rates higher than seen in many years and will begin to move us back to a more regular approach to compensation. In addition to those percentage increases, I'm proposing funds to continue our job studies, to dedicate funds to address pay compression and increase pay ranges, which means where people start and if they're maxed out in the pay range. Let me take a break from what I was reading here. Pay compression, when you don't have raises in a workforce over a couple years, what happens is you hire people. You continue to hire people. And what you have is people coming in at the same salary and they'll be at a starting salary, and that's true in law enforcement, where you'll have, and then what's going to happen is if we offer these pay raises to new people coming in, those new people coming in will actually make more than the people who have been here a year or two. And that makes it very difficult when you're sitting side by side with a coworker. So there are ways to address that. It takes a lot of person-by-person analysis to uncompress, decompress, pay, and it takes a lot of work. And I think we should commit to doing that because that is an important point in the workplace. Given that the pay raises I'm suggesting here would take place beginning July 1st of next year, in the interim, I'm suggesting a 1% pay increase for all staff that are qualified effective January 1st. And then, as I mentioned last month, bonuses for our police and also for our emergency mental health workers. I'm proposing $3,500 in a one-time payment. I think it's incredibly important that we recognize that these allocations and making this statement now is a statement of my priority about compensation going essentially to the head of the line. We have a number of needs in our community, whether for affordable housing, infrastructure, our access to trails, parks, libraries, safe and affordable transportation systems. I can go on. But placing county staff at the head of the line would recognize their work and I think be an important statement. So that concludes my presentation on this. I think if is there another slide? Yes, it's the same slide we started out with. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions about the specific compensation proposals I'm making, and then also any questions you might have about the rescue plan allocations.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. And I appreciate all the different parts of the presentation, the detail, Ms. Hughes, that you went through. It made me think of the rigor that sometimes you hear about at the Office of Management and Budget and everything coming up through the defense, through the federal government. But there was a lot of those proposals reflected discussions we've had over the past months. I appreciate also that you framed the big picture, Mr. Schwartz. We have a couple of things going on. We have the votes that will come, the vote that would come on item 48, which is preliminary American Rescue Plan. And then we will also have budget guidance direction that we will take up immediately after. Keeping in mind that we have another opportunity to look over the coming month at many of these recommendations. On item 48, I guess I will just, and certainly entertain questions and comments as we move forward, but I will just say that a couple of those items I want to learn a little bit more about the disparity, that 500,000. There's a number of those which I'm inclined to support, but I want to learn more about it. There's also some questions that I've asked in the past about some of the, how we're handling some of the positions that we have in some of our departments and how they're counted as far as the ongoing. But broadly supportive, and I'm excited to move forward to this item 48 and then budget guidance. Are there questions on item 48, or Mr. Schwartz or Ms. Hughes or Mr. Stevenson's? Ms. Crystal.
Wanted to make a couple of comments about ARPA since
Sure.
Before we talk more about budget guidance, and certainly we'll have some thoughts there when we talk about compensation of our employees, which I agree with Mr. Schwartz is the most important feature and aspect of our upcoming fiscal year 23 guidance. But with regard to the American Rescue Act plan, American Rescue Plan Act dollars, echo our chairman's thanks to the really thoughtful work that has been done by our staff, not only the DMF team before us, but each of the department levels to make sure that we're really seizing this opportunity. I wanted to flag that I'm particularly excited about the proposals in transit. We've been having a lot of conversations at the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission apropos of some great research that team did recently about zero fare transit, especially buses, which is an area of growing attention. I think the pandemic really demonstrated to us that we have, including in Arlington County, a significant part of our population is transit dependent. And I think that is a group of folks who we have opportunities to serve more robustly with transit. The balance is, of course, making sure that we're targeting those efforts. And I know there has been some interest in zero fare bus programs entirely in Arlington. I think what we've learned from, again, the research in the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission that, for example, most of the region's bus operators like ART derive about 40% of our our fares from federal SMART benefits. So going entirely zero fare means leaving money on the table. But targeting the zero fare programs to those who are transit dependent, those who most need them, those who are eligible for other programs is a really exciting use, I think, of ARPA money. I think it's really consistent with the spirit, not only in serving those most impacted by the pandemic, but a way to, if you'll pardon the slogan, which I suppose is a little bit political, but build back better in terms of our transit systems and ensuring that they are supporting those who most need them. I am also incredibly excited about the pilot to offer zero fare options for students because I know we have been trying for years to get unstuck on this question of how to coordinate getting more of our secondary students in particular on transit. I also wanted to just start planting a seed with my colleagues, and I've begun to circulate a memo on this, but I want to make sure that we are not missing an opportunity to take a big swing on childcare. I really respect the effort that staff has put forward, about $100,000 to expand one of our pre-K options. My understanding is that's sort of on the order of maybe single-digit number of kids that could be added. And of course, this is a problem that is much bigger than that, and I am really excited about the potential. ARPA is, of course, one-time money, where you have to be cautious about allocating it to anything that's going to come with ongoing commitments. But what it is great for is capital. And I think especially looking at our child care sector, knowing that ARPA is specifically supposed to address not only investments in new or expanded early learning, but also support for pandemic-affected small businesses. I think we have an opportunity to look for those in the community who might stand to gain from a significant infusion of capital to tackle one of the biggest cost drivers for childcare centers, which is their rent, or in some cases their mortgages. So in the same way that we have seen our housing grants go hand in hand with capital investments in CAFs, committed affordable units on housing, I think it's time and an exceptional opportunity for us to think about how to try to create some committed, affordable space for childcare centers so that they can, in turn, offer significantly discounted childcare. And of course, if childcare can be significantly discounted, that allows our subsidies to go a lot further. Right now, it's very hard for most childcare providers to accept subsidies because they are stretched so thin between paying their rent and compensating their employees. So lots more in the works on that proposal. I wanted to plant a seed because the manager has, I think, teed up for us in his recommendations about $6 million unallocated. And to take a big swing, I think we're going to have to look at dedicating a fair amount of that to childcare. So I look forward to more conversation in the days ahead. And Mr. Chair, I'm grateful for the chance to share some early thinking about that at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Crystal. So just as you referred to slide 4 for those following along at home. I don't think we need to necessarily show it. There's, at this stage, but there's slides 7 and 8. There's the guaranteed income pilot, which I think I am very interested in. There's a number of other items to assess our affordable housing property. There's a number of other items, and I heard loud and clear the big swing on child care. So, Ms. Garvey, we'll have a little more discussion, and we'll get to the manager's very helpful comments in slides 12 and 13, and his letter to email to staff, all staff. But first, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we're all pretty much on the same page here in a lot of ways, and I won't be repetitive. I will thank Ms. Crystal for thinking about taking a big swing at child care. I think this is the time to take big swings. And I actually appreciate the manager in many ways doing that with this money. There's a lot of innovation in here. There are a lot of things that, back in 2020, I kept saying that the pandemic was making so clear these problems that we had, really glaring problems of inequities, and that our most vulnerable people were also our most crucial workers. And there's an incredible disconnect between what we pay people and what they're worth, and how hard it is for people just to live, and how we're going to survive as a community if people can't afford to live here. So I think this is starting to really address that, and I really appreciate that innovative approach. And I realize in some ways, because we don't know what's coming, you have to be careful about the budget. Most budgets, they're new programs that you kind of put in, and we haven't been able to do that. But with ARPA, we can. So that's exciting. I'm very supportive of this. I'm really interested in talking more about childcare and seeing what we can do to really give that a big push. I have often said that if you're going to look at why are people going to live somewhere, what would make us stand out, and it's good schools and it's good childcare. Any community that could offer high quality, low-cost childcare to anybody who wants it or needs it is going to be, I think, a successful community. And I think in the future, when people can live wherever they want to live, there are going to be some important things that we need to do to make sure that people still want to be here because it's expensive. So I've probably, having said I wouldn't talk long, I've gone on a bit, but I'm very pleased with this. Thank you. And I look forward to the discussion. Finally, I will say thank you, Mr. Manager, for addressing the issue with our employees. It really is overdue. The only way we serve this county is through our employees, and we've got to have good employees and treat them well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carvey. Mr. Dorsey, and my apologies for not seeing you sooner.
No worries. A couple of questions just about some of the proposals. First, as it relates to broadband, the 150 in FY23, that's in addition to the 50 that we've already allocated in 22 for a total of 200, right? Thank you. And a little bit more conversation, if you could, about the transit proposals. So if you could share a little bit the math on the student fareless initiative, which, you know, for 22 is roughly, doing the math, it's like we're expecting that's going to, students are going to become 15% of the ridership in 22, and then double that in 23 if I'm extrapolating the fare revenue that ART collects.
We're working, DES is working vigorously to lay out a full plan on this, and the manager may have additional comments on this. These are estimates right now with certain assumptions that they're currently, stress testing. So we may have to come back to you over the next couple weeks with some updates on not only this proposal, but there may be some other proposals that as we really get in there and vet, especially some of these, and Ms. Hughes mentioned that there may be some revenue offsets to some of the programs that are being proposed. So this is our best guess right now at costs for some of these programs, but as the manager has showed before, when I make certain estimates, we know some of these are, Richard's wrong sometimes. So we'll be coming back to you with
never wrong. Just more thinking results in better product. That's it. Never wrong.
More refined.
Yes. Speaking of the next one, I think this is going to be somewhat of a policy discussion. Hearing loud and clearly Ms. Crystal's preference for how you structure a fare assistance program or a fare-free program. I would encourage us, as we're thinking about it from a pilot perspective, to flesh out maybe some alternatives than simply providing a subsidy for low-income riders, and maybe in the spirit of thinking big and how we can maybe move towards more of a mode shift to sort of help with our larger climate change principles, in addition to making transit more affordable, or to think about other approaches, such as looking at the data of when smart benefits are tapped in, where we can get real granularity about when people are using smart benefits, what routes, and to maybe think about whether we do free all the time on certain routes, whether we do free during a certain time of day, if it can capture people during off-peak hours, for example. So I don't want us to, in the spirit of developing good pilots, I want us to test as many things as we possibly can to figure out what the ongoing sort of structure of program might be. So I'll just put that plug in and await further word on that. But I am incredibly supportive of our moving forward with these key initiatives, as I am for many others, but the transit and transportation ones are of key interest to me.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Mr. Karantonis.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would preface that with thanking the manager of being, responsive on the issue of compensation and of taking leadership on this. And I'm, literally very supportive of that, and also ready to discuss even more prospectively as we go into the next budget year. A couple of things on the transit as well. So pretty much, following Mr. Dorsey's thoughts, I've seen that the student program goes in fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2023, doubles in amount in the appropriation, but right after that, the low-income fare assistance starts with 1.2 million and declines in fiscal year 2023 to 250, which is quite a drop. And then I note that the ongoing impact is 2 million a year. So I understand that you're still working on this, but more or less, what justifies the difference? Well, one position increases, the other drops.
Right, so Ms. Hughes might...
The ongoing impact is twice the fiscal year 23.
Right, so Ms. Hughes, I think, has some more details on that, but the bulk, the reason the low transit is significant in the first year and less in the second year is we're buying fare cards. So it's that will then be distributed for their use.
So expensive.
And we don't know fully the utilization, and that's a lot of what DES is trying to do right now, is to get a better sense of the people that we're giving the card, the smart trip cards to, what their utilization will be, and how often then we'll have to refresh particular users' cards as they utilize transit. So do you have anything else to add sort of on that, or?
No, I think that's good on the low income. I would say on the student fare list, it's for half of a year in FY22 and then the full year, so both semesters of school in FY23, and so that's why the student one doubles.
Yes, okay, that I understand. The question was why the low fare goes from 1.2 to basically 250.
I think it's just what Mr. Stevenson was saying. They're loading the fare cards during FY22, so buying all of those fare cards, loading them with funding for people to be able to use, and then we'll be monitoring how much they're used, how quickly they're used, and taking that into account as they look to do this study for a longer-term program.
Thank you. Fair. Another point is that I'm fully supportive of Ms. Crystal's lead on childcare and taking a big swing. I always thought that investing, and making the basic asset more accessible for those who will be running it makes, on the long term, a better case for us supporting, or let's say extends the reach of our dollars, and that's great on this. We still are one of the most expensive regions in the nation in childcare, so this is not a competitive advantage. So an additional question: is it completely out of scope of ARPA funding to discuss allocations that would have to do with environmental, so for example with flood mitigation or extra? Did the departments not address that, or is it funded in other places?
Michael Stewart, who is officially a student of ARPA regulations, I'll tee it up by saying capital spending was actually encouraged in some of the regulations, but he can answer that question more precisely.
Sure. So specifically, ARPA calls out 3 different flavors of capital infrastructure investments as being allowable. Those are sewers, storm sewers, and I'm going to forget the third one. It doesn't matter. Stormwater flood mitigation is an allowable use under ARPA, but all infrastructure is not necessarily called out as an allowable use. I believe the idea was that eventually the infrastructure bill would come along and fill the remaining gap.
If I could add to that, I think that Mr. Stewart pointed out something important. When we were putting the proposal together, my direction to staff was, I know we have a number of capital needs that involve bricks and mortar and things like stormwater. Given what was pending with the infrastructure bill from the federal government, I said, let's just take a pause and see what happens with that. And we're heading into the 10-year CIP. So what that did is actually freed up some brain space for people to think of things that were more operational, which gets us a little bit into this space where we should be concerned about pilots that might become permanent, but that was my thinking.
Yes, and it's fair. It's also strategically correct. Thank you for clarifying that. Last but not least, I'm very pleased to see the support for economic development initiatives here. And one question I have, so I see the relaunch programming getting a significant support. I think this is wonderful. I'm very, very supportive of that. Back to Work was very interesting as well. We have seen one of the sectors that have suffered the most is our hotel sector and tourism industry, et cetera. Is there anything that would fit in these two titles? So would relaunch, for example, be at any rate involved also to supporting tourism or something similar? Probably not.
So let me take a first crack at that, and we'll see what my friends at the other end of the table have to say. Currently, the state is offering some grant opportunities for our travel and tourism part of economic development, and so we're applying for that. And in addition, we've had a number of conversations. I know the board brought it up last month about our hotel industry, and we just went through a process of asking questions of the hotel managers and compiling the results of that survey. We are looking at a few alternatives. They're not ready yet, and I think that they might end up being something that we want to tie to some other programs at this point. So still under active consideration. You don't see any specific dollars for that here, though.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis. So I would like to go ahead and make a motion. I'm going to have a question for the manager in a minute regarding our the 1%. But first, I want to go ahead and get a motion on the table with respect to item 48. And I'll ask the, in a minute, not quite yet, but in a minute, I'll ask the clerk to put up a change, just an edit to the second of the county manager's 4 items in his recommendation. The reason for that change is that I believe that with respect to retention bonuses for our mental health, Department of Human Services, our police, I think that it's more appropriate for that to come, I believe, from closeout and allocations than from our American Rescue Plan Act funding. Just looking at the 4 different categories, I know that this is something I've talked with the manager about. So, Madam Clerk, if you go ahead and put that language for Part 2 of Item 48 on the, if you're able to put that. I think that this is, I've tried to not surprise anyone, but it just simply reads, direct the manager to allocate approximately $2.1 million from the closeout funding for the Police Department and the Department of Human Services for retention bonuses and $174,000 to the Sheriff's Office over the coming month. And I think that works. I'm happy to be corrected by our Ms. Kaur or Mr. Schwartz.
I think it's fine, but maybe for the Sheriff's Office, you want to specify that it's matching the state fund for the bonuses.
So, Madam Clerk, if you could put a comma and add matching the state's bonuses. I think that addresses it.
Could I ask a procedural question?
Sure, Ms. Crystal.
I'm sorry, so if we're using, so we're voting neither on allocating closeout funding nor allocating ARPA tonight. We took a previous action under Ms. Garvey's motion to just support, I guess, sort of the advertisement of closeout, of the manager's recommendations on closeout. So is this a total standalone motion, or are we adding that to Ms. Garvey's?
No. Good question. Totally fair. There is a portion of item 48, and I probably misspoke about this earlier, that of the county manager's recommendation, as I understand it, that is actually allocating that money that we talked about last month, and that is the second part of the motion in item 48. Have I described it right, Mr. Schwartz?
Yeah, the one thing, so for the most part, you're safe to assume that we're making recommendations and we'll have the opportunity to consider them and weigh in on them, and then you get to take a vote next month. The one exception to that, there might be two, but I'll start with one. The one exception to that is the bonus money for police and emergency mental health workers, and also to match what the state has done for the sheriff, and that comes to the close to 2.1 million. We had suggested that come out of the American Rescue Plan, and we weren't suggesting that we have another month's conversation about it. We were suggesting, in that case, that you allocate the funds and that the funds be spent over the next several weeks.
So this is a totally independent action of Ms. Garvey's motion, if it's going to be allocated at a closeout.
Yes,
Yeah,
Ms.
okay,
Garvey's
great.
was
I'm
40,
supportive.
that's right.
Okay.
Was 47. This is, will be a part of item 48. It's the second of the 4 recommendations, so.
Well, I don't think it's part of the item 48 because item 48 is about ARPA.
You know, if I could just add that I'd like to go back to, we're not going to do it, the slide that shows how they're all interrelated to each other, but this is, you're exactly right. What we're doing here is not an allocation of American Rescue Plan funds. It is an allocation of closeout funds, because my original suggestion of taking that out of ARPA, the chair had suggested, and I'm amenable to switching the source of funds. So that essentially would supersede part of what we were suggesting in item 47.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may?
Sure.
I think you need to add to this motion and that the presentation to the public of closeout funds as previously adopted gets amended to reflect this action. Because we made this action to approve something that was a set of numbers, $1.8 million, and the rest unallocated. We are now at $4 million.
Correct.
With the rest unallocated. So we have to direct the manager to revise his presentation to the public.
Sure.
And if I could just add, I know this is going to seem, the heads will nod over there, but Richard said that the proposals on 47 were simply preliminary and the final numbers would come back after we revised it. We've just made one revision right now.
And we'll make all the technical adjustments to this and any other changes you might have in item 47 in November. You will see that in the report as underline and strike through, so it's clear what has changed from the October report. But the appropriation piece, this technical stuff, we will take care of in the November action.
Okay.
Sure. So I'm trying to see if I can, I think Ms. Crystal and Mr. Dorsey, you have good points. And what I suggest, I did try to check this with our attorney beforehand, is in, and there may need to be separate action taken, but I think that there should be 2 votes, one on item 48, recommendations 1, 3, and 4, and then a separate vote on the language that is on this screen. Does that sound correct to our attorney, I guess is the question? Or if you would prefer and it's accurate and it works for both the manager and the attorney, then we could do items 1 through 4 with this language in place of part 2 under item 48.
I mean, I think either is fine. I mean, I think the important thing is you are going to be allocating this money today.
That's correct.
And not in November. So it's more than just amending 47 for the presentation.
Could I ask, I mean, our attorney might weigh in. First of all, I don't even know that a motion would be to direct the manager to allocate. We as the board have the power to allocate, do we not? So could this be an entirely separate action? To me, that seems like the most appropriate thing. I'm not trying to be pedantic about this here, but we are in unprecedented times and we are handling the budget in an unprecedented way, and there's a lot of opportunity for confusion. And so for anybody following along at home, we're setting up the opportunity for them to weigh in on what the manager has proposed for closeout money, to weigh in on what the manager has proposed for ARPA money, and then we are about to adopt our guidance for fiscal 23. We're adopting it, the comments closed, and this is something we are adopting and acting on tonight, not taking comment on. So I think really trying to be explicit about what those actions are could be really helpful. So if this could be an independent action,
Sure, that's what I think is the best way to handle it, and I think you said either works, but I also really appreciate that it's very important that we get on the record that we're actually allocating that sum of funds as you did. Is there any additional points you wanted to make, Ms. Kaur?
No, that's it.
Great. So we will first move this language, this is directing, 30 days ago, we said we would take action to address some of the challenges our police department as well as the Department of Human Services were facing. And so I will first move this language, certainly, I know we may have questions, but I'll go to I'll first move that language and ask if there is a second. Moved and seconded. I think I just spoke to the importance and the time sensitivity of us trying to address the challenges we're facing in our Department of Human Services and our police department. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Now we will return to item 48, and I would like to get on the table a motion that is the county manager's recommendation with the exception of item 2. So specifically that we allocate $6 million of available American Rescue Plan Act funding to costs associated with pandemic responses, including testing, contact tracing, and vaccine operations, staffing, technology, and other costs of supporting operations, including the 7999 call center and logistics, cleaning and personal protective equipment, and temporary staffing to support eviction prevention, congregate care, and homeless support, that we further present the county manager's recommendations to consider the allocation and appropriation of ARPA of approximately $4.6 million in ARPA funding in fiscal year 2022 funds, and that we direct the county manager to continue use of ARPA funding allocations for use identified as ongoing in the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget. Is there a second?
Second.
I think this is consistent with the presentation, and I'm certainly open to questions and discussion. I do apologize that there's a couple of moving parts, and I appreciate the attempts and efforts to clarify. Mr. Karantonis.
The first question is whether this covers Ms. Crystal's child care allocation, or this has to be.
It does not. This is, the manager's recommendation leaves 6.1 unallocated?
It's actually 5.3 now.
5.3, oh, reduced, right, because of.
So the question is whether.
No.
Sorry, was that, that's assuming the manager's recommendation for the 1% comes out of ARPA?
It's always been 5.3. I would just
Okay.
say if you went back and looked at the slides, there was an addition mistake, so.
Oh, I see. Okay. So we have $5.3 million to discuss amongst ourselves that the manager has left unallocated. And so
Yes,
that's
so
my
that's a
primary
follow-up.
focus for discussion.
Yeah, it's a follow-up.
Exactly.
So not to, well, I want to confuse things further. We had allocated, was it 1 point, how much was it that was going towards the bonuses out of ARPA? Yeah, I think that's what you're asking. There's an additional approximately $2 million now available under ARPA.
Yes. Thank you.
So the number's closer to $7 million.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis and Ms. Crystal, for the answer. Did you have further questions, Mr. Karantonis, on this?
No, I'm okay. I just wanted to understand the sequence, because even the first motion, I was understanding that as a modification of the 48 motion, so that's okay. Well,
Sure, my apologies again. So the question is on the motion. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, that motion passes. We have now passed those three parts of the county manager's recommendation with respect to item 48.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I did want to take a minute because I talked about it last month, but I did want to update the community generally because I painted a pretty grim picture of what was going on in the Virginia Hospital Center and with our mental health. That the situation still remains pretty much the same. We're working very, very closely with Virginia Hospital Center on steps to add additional space there, and the Crisis Intervention Center, which is a primary part of our proposal, probably will not be up and running until January, and the bonuses that you provided will be really important. We are so far down on staff at this point that we can't actually answer all the calls we're getting. And so what happens is, by default, rather than sending out some of our really trained professional mental health experts, people are going straight to the hospital. which is even a little bit worse than it was before. We've had extensive conversations, as I know you have, with our state delegation and also with the state, but the problem remains. So I did want to thank the board for taking that action. It's the point now where it's a bad cycle, and to get staff from other parts of the department to come in and sub in, they really need the incentive to do that because it's gut-wrenching kind of work. So thank you very much for your action.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. So we have budget direction that we will take up for fiscal year 23. Before we did so, I did want to check with the manager with respect to one item that you outlined on slides 12 and 13 of your proposal. This was the 1% pay increase for the start of the year. And I think the intention there is that that by the end of the year, all employees would be vaccinated. Is that correct?
Right. So thank you for raising that question. I don't think I've officially updated the community on the status of our efforts, which began with a policy I issued in August directing all staff to report their vaccination status by September 13th. We have, as of the middle of September, and we've continued to follow up, now we're almost in the middle of October, told people that if they report their vaccination status, if they were not vaccinated, then they were going to be responsible for getting tested on a weekly basis. As of the end of last week, reporting that the percentage of permanent county staff that have been vaccinated is a tick below 90%. I think it's 89.8%. And staff continues to get vaccinated. In the memo I sent to employees yesterday, and this wasn't the first time I had mentioned it to employees, I have a series of employee town halls, that my expectation is that I will announce a policy that's going to be effective January 1st that would mandate the vaccine for staff and eliminating the testing alternative. Of course, there still would be the opportunity for accommodations that we provide through our Office of Human Rights. And I think that, you know, I did want to spend a minute explaining my thinking there. I know we've seen this debate throughout the country, but for me, it's incredibly important in the following order: for the health of our workforce, for the health of our community, and just our operational effectiveness and readiness to be able to go out there and do that work. And I want to remind people, getting a vaccine will not mean you'll never get the COVID infection, but what it will mean is that if it happens to you, you'll come out of it much more quickly, and it really does protect you, the science has shown, against severe illness and death. And so I think that's an important statement, and I think that I've been hearing from the workforce that many people welcome this. That doesn't mean that everyone is going to welcome it. So between now and the end of the year, that's an opportunity for people to continue to get tested and to get comfortable with the concept of what I've just laid out.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Appreciate that context and background. Colleagues, with that, and moving towards big picture, we will go to the budget guidance, which I believe the Madam Clerk has a copy of. There are a few changes from last month, and I will just, and this is an opportunity to get ready should others have big picture thoughts in addition that you'd like to close on. This initial part is the same, if my memory serves correct, but what you see in A and B is really from the board, as I understand it. I don't know that this sort of step has been taken before by the board, and we are committing to, directing the manager to bring a budget that has at least 4.25% for all general employees and in merit-based increases, and 6.5% in merit-based increases for uniformed public safety staff in the budget that starts July of 2022, which is known as the FY23 budget as we describe it. There's also Part B, which the manager spoke to in slides 12 and 13. So this is unprecedented, and it is a recognition that our employees are public servants, and we must value them as we continue to respond as a community and as a county, and to try to build back better out of this challenge and recover as a community from the economic impacts as well as the health impacts of COVID. So that the rest of the guidance tracks what we discussed last month, and open for comments, questions, or thoughts on this item. Mr. Karantonis.
Well, that was vestigial, but I can still say a couple of things. First of all, I think that it is more than appropriate that we have been now in the third meeting that we have been discussing compensation, and I believe in public and many more in closed session. I do believe that it's about time to set at least the frame the order of magnitude that we are looking at. I do believe that the addition of at least is important in the text, in the document, and I believe that this reflects not only the appreciation that we have for all our employees during the pandemic year, but especially also about the incredible performance of our uniformed services during the pandemic, during the very difficult year of 2020 and ongoing. So that, I believe, sets the stage for a robust budget discussion about how we value the quality of services and the quality of people we employ in Arlington County. One of our number one obligations here is to make sure that we provide the highest possible, the best possible services to residents in Arlington County. And the first, we start with their compensation. We had this discussion when we discussed also restoring the collective bargaining rights of our employees. So on this trajectory, we remain constant and consistent, and I support the text as it is right now as in form of guidance, open for discussion in the weeks and months to come.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis. We haven't yet made a motion, but to Ms. Crystal for comments.
Sure. Really on the kind of issue at hand, because I do support the guidance as I did last month and appreciate the chair's leadership to pull this together. I come to this with some hesitance because as the prior discussion indicates, I can be a little pedantic when it comes to our budget process and a little bit of a, well, I guess a hawk for process, right? It's part of the reason I feel so strongly that we should engage in the practice of carrying over as much closeout as we can, because I really think we have a budget process for a reason. We compare all of the community's needs at a given time and assess and set priorities, and that's what the budget does. This is worth doing, even with all of that hesitance. I think about the fact that we asked our employees, and the summary table of the freezes and the very, very modest increases they've seen over the past 2 fiscal years, we asked our hardworking staff to basically take a back seat to some really pressing needs in our community at a time that revenue was shrinking. And they did that, uncomplainingly. And I think in particular those who have had public-facing jobs, who have put themselves at considerable risk throughout the pandemic for public safety, for those who are engaged in critical infrastructure work of keeping our streets operating. We asked them to put the community's needs first for 2 years, and they did. And so I think with this unusual action, we are asking the community to put staff's needs first for a year, and to hold them separate and apart from the rest of the budget process. And I know that it is going to involve trade-offs. There's a lot of pent-up demand for expansions in county programs and services after 2 years of revenue shocks and challenges with COVID. But to say, after the incredible performance of our employees over the last 2 years, we're going to take this unusual step to put them first and hold them apart is very much warranted. And I will say too, for public safety, in particular police, as the manager was describing tonight, that dynamic of Virginia Hospital Center, the crisis level that's reached and the spiral that we are in, which is that as officers leave, the demands on the remaining corps become even more untenable. I know that pay alone is not enough to keep people in a really difficult job when they have other options, and it bears emphasizing that our police have other options. We recruit very highly educated and trained individuals to serve in ACPD's uniforms, and they have other choices. And compensation alone is probably not enough, or is a necessary but not sufficient step. But I do think it's important, and this is something we've heard from employee representatives, that they should see kind of consistent down payment, so to speak. And so I appreciate the sequence here, which is that the bonuses that we've just approved in that separate action will go into effect now. The 1% increases, as with all staff, will go into effect in January. And then the merit-based increases of 6.5% will begin on their anniversary dates. At least 6.5% will begin on their anniversary dates in the year ahead. And I think because these past 2 years have been so difficult, it's important to show that commitment unfolding over time, because not everyone follows the machinations of the board. Sometimes it's hard for even us to follow the machinations of the board, but people do follow what's in their paycheck. And so, again, what's in their paycheck is a necessary but not sufficient step that we can take to try to address these crises of recruitment and retention.
Thank you, Ms. Crystal. Any other remarks? We have Ms. Garvey and Mr. Dorsey. Go ahead, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, it's getting late, but I really appreciate everything that Ms. Crystal said about how important it is to signal to our employees. And I think we're letting our employees know that we really did recognize all of the work that they've done, and obviously we'd like to even do more if we could. But I think it also signals to our community that we value our employees. And I think that's important too. I think many, we do actually, while the type of work we're in, we tend to hear more complaints than compliments, because people, when they're upset, they contact us, and they don't always when they're happy. But I have, over the last year and a half, really gotten some just delightful emails from folks talking about how much they respect and appreciate what our employees have been doing throughout the pandemic. But there's two sides of a coin. Some people are not appreciative and can make people's work harder, but this is just a message to our employees and a message to our community about how much we value our employees. And I think it's important to remember, as I said earlier, the only way we deliver our services is through our employees. So I really hope this is helpful, and appreciate the manager coming forward with this suggestion and taking it way out of the way we usually do it. I always like to postpone decisions till the very end on budgets, just because more later, but I'm pleased on this one to say right now that we're going to commit to doing this, at least.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. I actually did have a question before I give hopefully a brief concluding comment. Number 5. Perhaps I just missed it last month, but if someone could explain to me what is meant by the final sentence in that, and what exactly we'll have produced?
So I think it's a fair question. It's not, and it's one that I saw, but it's not one that I drafted. So I don't know myself, but I'm certainly happy to, I don't know if there's particular pieces.
It certainly doesn't have to happen tonight if people need to track it down or figure it out, so I can wait for another time. That's fine.
Well, I would note, and I'm not trying to be clever here, given that this is your guidance to me, that I read it to say that we would go back and see if there were any changes that schools needed to make to facilities that were sort of one-time changes that might need to be addressed in a way that was outside the normal discourse of a conversation on budget and educational challenges. I think to a certain extent we've done that on an ongoing basis, so I'm not sure there'll be much to look at there, and also to analyze what kind of funding they've received, from the federal government and state.
Okay.
Mr. Dorsey, I mean, I saw that too, and I was right. you know, you need to relook at things every now and then. I sort of viewed that it was just that we were going to also kind of take a look at the principles of revenue sharing in light of all the different changes. Everything will probably stay the same, but it's a good idea to take a look at it and not just keep doing it the same way we've been doing it without thinking about it. That was how I read it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would have been
sound
there
okay?
until I saw the last part of it, which seemed to narrow the review from principles of revenue sharing to impact of the pandemic, but whatever. I'll leave it there. I know we're all tired.
Last part is that the one that says provide analysis of whether the principles of revenue sharing, right, work as intended.
Sure.
Within this limited scope.
Yes.
So anyway, we can move on. I'll just say as a concluding comment to echo what everyone said about compensation and the need for it. There are going to be a million ways people look at this. They're going to look at the number as being a positive step forward. They're going to see it as not enough. They're going to see it as too much. We really can't control how a particular stakeholder or interest group views the numbers that are presented here. I'll just at least share my truth of what it means to me in light of a budget year where we expect continued softening on revenues. We have not asked the manager to consider increases in tax rates and considering the headwinds that are ahead of us. This is a clear prioritization of compensation within next year's budget in light of all that we know and all that we don't know. But it's absolutely necessary. We have no normal processes anymore. I appreciate Ms. Crystal being the steward, but for the last couple of years, we have upended just about everything, and this is a continuation of that. And I recall that last year, we upended our processes to make sure that we met the direct needs of people who were in crisis, whether it be health, housing, economic opportunity, whatever. And this year, we are prioritizing making sure that those people who are delivering those services don't suffer a continued degradation to their living standards as they go about doing the work for this community. And while I know Ms. Crystal didn't mean it this way, it's not county staff versus things for county residents, not just because many of our county staff are county residents, but each and every job that they perform is for the benefit of everybody who lives in this county. So we are investing in our county, just focusing in a different way on the employees who've taken a backseat for the last couple of years in a way that unfortunately we had to do it in order to meet the more pressing needs of the day. I long for the day where we're in a sure footing from the budget where we don't have to make those stark trade-offs. It's always a balancing act, but we've been in the position of having to make either or trade-offs, and hopefully we will soon be in a place where we can have a balanced and steady approach to meeting our overall goals year in and year out. But until that day, we do what we can, and I think this is a great step forward.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. 3 thoughts. First, the manager has proposed these levels, and we put the specific numbers, and I do feel that it's important as we balance fiscal responsibility and restraint with really investing in our employees. That's why the at least is important to me, because if our economic prognosis and our TOT improves, our hotels improve, if we gain, I know that this board wants to be able to provide more, but we cannot promise that. We do think it's very important that we take this strong first step. And so that's on the balance between fiscal responsibility and investing in our employees. Second, I would just ask that we all remember the pictures of the folks in New York City banging their pots for public safety officers. We can't say we honor public service if we don't fund it in our budgets. And so feel very strongly it's important, and that's why this unusual step. And I guess I'd close by just thanking. It looks as though the DMF team has been through a law school set of finals or a business school, whatever it is. You guys clearly have been working very hard, and that's just another example of folks in sewer streets all across our employees. We need to value them. And so with that, I'll ask for I'll make the motion to approve the guidance as shown on, on the screen. And as we've discussed, is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have adopted fiscal year 23 guidance.